Hello friends, welcome to my channel Hardwork Stories. I invite you to join me on a walk through the city during the Fires Festival and listen to a new and interesting story. Let's go with me.
You know what hurts more than a fight? Silence. A fight means someone still cares, but silence, cold, unproposed silence, means that decision is already made. And you are the last to know. This is a story about a man who lived in that silence, and what he did when he stopped waiting and started looking for the truth.
My wife stopped speaking to me for weeks. No fights, no explanations, just silence. I thought she was struggling. Turns out she was planning. Then the truth walked right through my front door, and I realized she'd never been lost at all. She'd been gone for a long time. My name is Grant Mercer. I'm 46 years old. I've spent the last 18 years managing a regional chain of retail stores across the Mid-Atlantic. The kind of job that sounds boring until you realize you're responsible for 14 locations, over 200 employees, and margins thin enough to give a grown man gray hair. I built something real out of that career. Naomi used to say she was proud of me. Past tense. I know that now. We met when I was 28. She was 25, working as a marketing coordinator for a hotel group downtown. She was sharp, funny, in a dry way that I liked, and she had this way of walking into a room that made you notice her. We were married 3 years later. No kids. That conversation never quite landed anywhere solid. For a long time, I thought we were fine. Then about 2 years ago, something shifted. At first it was subtle. She stopped asking about my day. She started spending more evenings in the spare room she called her office, door closed, headphones on. When I knocked, she'd open it with the look a person gives a salesman who rings the doorbell at dinner time. Tolerant. Barely. I adjusted. I gave her space. I tried not to hover. Then the weeks of silence started. I mean real silence. Not the comfortable kind that settles between two people who've been together long enough to sit without talking. This was the cold kind. The deliberate kind. I'd say good morning and get a nod. Maybe. I'd ask if she wanted coffee, and she'd already be pouring her own. I started to feel like a roommate she hadn't gotten around to evicting yet. I tested it one Tuesday. I sat down at the kitchen table, where she was scrolling through her phone, and just watched her. 30 seconds. A minute. She never looked up. I said her name. Naomi. Clear and calm. She tapped something on her screen, set the phone face down on the table, and stood up to refill her glass of water. No response. Not even a flinch. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. I wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. What I felt then was something quieter and worse, like I was slowly being erased. My best friend Curtis Holt had been picking up on it too. He and I go back to college. He's one of those guys who notices things without making a production of it. And about a month into the silent treatment, he pulled me aside after a cookout at his place and said quietly, "You good, man? You and Naomi seem, I don't know, off." I told him we were fine. Old habit. What I didn't tell him was that I'd started watching her more carefully. The late evenings. The way her phone screen always tilted away from me. The faint smell of a different soap on her jacket. Not hers, not mine. Small things. The kind of things you notice when someone stops bothering to hide them. Because that's what rattled me the most. She wasn't hiding. She was just done caring whether I noticed. Our 21st anniversary was coming up in 3 weeks. I had already made a reservation. Part of me held on to that date like a lifeline. Like maybe something about the occasion would break the ice and we could find our way back to each other. I wasn't ready to let go yet. But the morning I finally woke up and looked around that quiet house. Really looked, something settled in my chest like cold water. She hadn't spoken a meaningful word to me in weeks. And I realized, standing there in the kitchen with my coffee going cold, that I had two choices. Keep waiting for her to come back, or start paying attention to where she'd actually gone. I put the coffee down. I went to work. And I started paying very close attention. 3 weeks had a way of disappearing fast when you were dreading something and hoping for it at the same time. I kept the reservation at Carmine's. I even upgraded the table. Corner booth, quieter, the kind of spot where a couple could actually talk without competing with the noise from the bar. I told myself it was a gesture, a signal. Look, Naomi, I'm still here. I'm still trying. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up early and made coffee the way she liked it. Half calf, one sugar, a splash of oat milk that she'd switched to a couple years back. I set the mug on her nightstand, got dressed quietly, and headed downstairs to let her sleep in. It was a Saturday. I figured a slow morning might soften things. She came downstairs 40 minutes later, walked past the counter where I was reading, picked up the coffee, and took it to the couch without a word. No thank you. No good morning. Just the low sound of her phone buzzing twice and the soft tap of her thumb on the screen. I watched her for a moment. She was smiling at whatever she was reading. I looked back down at my newspaper and said nothing. By 6 that evening, I was standing in the bedroom doorway watching her get ready. She looked good. I'll give her that. She'd done her hair, put on the dark green dress I'd always liked on her. For one brief, stupid moment, I felt something close to hope. We drove to the restaurant mostly in silence. I tried twice to start a conversation, mentioned a problem at one of my store locations that had taken up most of my week, then asked about a friend of hers who had recently moved to Denver. She gave me 3-word answers both times and went back to looking out the passenger window. At the table, she ordered the salmon, I ordered the veal, and we sat across from each other like two people waiting for a flight that was already delayed. You look nice tonight, I offered. She glanced up from the menu, already returned it to the server. Thanks. That was it. Thanks. Like I was a stranger who'd held the door open. I leaned back and let a beat pass before I said, more directly, Naomi, can we actually talk? Not about logistics. About us. About what's been happening in this house for the past 2 months. She set her water glass down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry. Not guilty. Just tired. Grant, let's not do this here. Then where? I kept my voice level. Because you won't do it home either. Her jaw tightened slightly. I need some space to figure things out. Can you give me that? I've been giving you space, I replied evenly. I've been giving you so much space, I barely exist in my own house anymore. She looked away, picked up her fork even though the food hadn't arrived yet. I don't want to fight on our anniversary. I studied her face. She wasn't upset. She wasn't on the verge of tears or reaching across the table to find my hand. She was somewhere else entirely, going through motions she'd already decided didn't matter. And that, more than any argument, more than any raised voice, was what told me everything. I said nothing more about it that night. We ate. We drove home. She went upstairs, changed into pajamas, and was asleep, or pretending to be, before I even finished brushing my teeth. I stood at the sink for a long time, looking at my own reflection. The next morning I went to the gym early, came back, showered, and was making breakfast when I heard her on the phone in the spare room. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just there. But her voice carried. He keeps trying, she was saying, and there was something in her tone I hadn't heard in months, light, a little amused, like she was recounting a mildly entertaining inconvenience. He actually upgraded the table. I almost felt bad. Almost. I set the spatula down on the counter. Slow and deliberate. She laughed softly at something the other person said. Then, quieter, I know. It's just, not yet. I have to figure out the right time. I walked to the back door, stepped outside onto the deck, and stood in the morning air. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere down the block. Overhead, 2 birds argued in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. I had spent 21 years building a life with that woman. I had worked every long week, managed every hard quarter, come home and tried, genuinely tried, to be the husband she wanted. And last night she had sat across from me in that restaurant and smiled in her water glass, already somewhere else, already counting down to something I wasn't part of. He keeps trying. She almost felt bad. I went back inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone. I pulled up my contacts and found the number for a lawyer I'd heard about through a colleague, a sharp, no-nonsense family law attorney named Patricia Calloway, who apparently didn't waste anyone's time. I didn't call. Not yet. But I saved the number and stared at it for a moment. Then I opened my banking app. I scrolled through our joint account, something I usually left on autopilot. What I saw made me slow down. Over the past 3 months, there had been a series of transfers I didn't recognize. Not huge amounts individually. 200 here, 350 there, but consistent. Regular. Always to the same external account I had no login for. My stomach dropped. I took screenshots of every transaction, going back as far as the app would show me, and sent them to my personal email. Then I locked my phone, finished my coffee, and stared out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the yard.
Wait, just stop for a second. She sat across from him at dinner. She took his coffee every morning. And then she got on the phone and laughed about it. Not sad, not sorry. She laughed. That is not a woman who is lost. That is a woman who made her choice. Keep that in mind, because this is the moment Grant made his.
She almost felt bad. I almost laughed. I spent the next 2 days moving carefully, not emotionally. I'd already made a kind of peace with the emotional side of things, or at least set it aside in a corner where it couldn't interfere with clear thinking. What I mean is I moved carefully in terms of information. I didn't confront Naomi. I didn't mention the phone call I'd overheard or the bank transfers I'd screenshotted. I went to work, came home, said the usual nothing, and watched. She was more relaxed than she'd been in months. That told me something. When a person stops worrying about being caught, they stop being careful. On Wednesday evening, Curtis called. He wanted to grab dinner Thursday, just the two of us. Said he had a work thing nearby, and figured we could catch up. Curtis was my oldest friend, and one of the few people whose company I actually looked forward to. So, I said yes without hesitation. We met at a sport bar off Route 9, a place we'd been going to since our mid-30s. Burgers, cold beer, whatever game was on. Comfortable in the way that only old friendships get. I hadn't told him yet how bad things had gotten. I'd been vague the last couple of times he'd asked. But that night, sitting across from him with the noise of the bar around us, something in me gave way. I told him about the anniversary dinner, the phone call in the morning, the bank transfers. Curtis listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter the further I went. When I finished, he sat back and rubbed the back of his neck. Grant, man, I'm sorry. That's a lot. I'm past sorry, I told him. I'm in information gathering mode. I need to know who she's talking to. He nodded slowly, staring at his beer. Then something shifted in his expression, a hesitation I didn't understand at first. What? I said. He looked up. I don't know if this is anything. I don't want to throw someone under the bus on a hunch. I leaned forward. Curtis. He exhaled. Derek Strickland has been asking about you lately. Casual like. How's Grant doing? How's the job? Are you guys still living out in Millbrook? He paused. I introduced him to Naomi at that backyard thing I had in July. You weren't there. You had that regional managers conference. The name landed like a stone in still water. Derek Strickland. I knew him. Not well, but enough. He'd come around Curtis's circle a few years back. Ran a small landscaping operation. Divorced. The kind of guy who always seemed to be orbiting other people's lives without quite having one of his own. I'd shaken his hand twice. Maybe 3 times. I kept my voice even. You think something's going on? Curtis looked genuinely uncomfortable. I think a married woman and a single man who keeps asking where her husband is. That's not a great pattern. I nodded, picked up my burger and took a bite. Chewed. Swallowed. The bar was loud. Some team on the screen had just scored and half the room reacted. All right, I said finally. All right. Curtis frowned. That's it. That's it for now. I set the burger down and looked at him steadily. I'm not going to blow up my life on a hunch either. I need something solid. But this helps. I drove home that night, with Derek Strickland's name sitting in my head like a splinter. The more I turned it over, the more pieces started fitting into places I hadn't wanted to look at before. The July conference I'd missed. The shift in Naomi's mood that had started. When? Late summer, roughly. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. The next day, I called Patricia Calloway. She was exactly what I'd been told. Direct, unhurried, no performance. I gave her a 10-minute summary over the phone, and she asked 3 sharp questions about assets, property, and whether my name was on everything it should be on. I answered all 3. At the end, she said, "Come in Friday morning. Bring the bank statements." I said I would. That same afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the browser on my personal laptop, not the work machine, not the one Naomi ever touched, and looked up Derek Strickland. His landscaping company had a basic website, a Facebook page with sporadic posts, and a public Instagram account with about 300 followers. I scrolled back through it slowly. 4th photo from the bottom. A rooftop somewhere, date stamped late August. He had one arm around a woman whose face was turned away from the camera, laughing at something off to the side. Dark hair, green jacket, a bracelet on her left wrist that I had paid $240 for. I sat back in my chair. There it was. I closed the laptop and stood up and walked to the window and looked at the backyard for a long time. The oak tree. The patio furniture I'd assembled myself 5 summers ago. The garden bed Naomi had talked about replanting that never got replanted. I didn't feel the way I thought I would. I thought there'd be rage, white hot, immediate. Instead, what came was something colder and steadier. Like a gear finally engaging after spinning loose for months. I had a name. I had a photo. I had a lawyer meeting on Friday. And Naomi had absolutely no idea that the man she'd stopped worrying about had just started making moves she wouldn't see coming. Friday morning, I sat across from Patricia Calloway in her office on the 14th floor of a building downtown. And within 20 minutes, I understood why people talked about her the way they did. She reviewed the bank statements I'd printed without any visible reaction. Just a pen moving across a yellow legal pad. Numbers being circled. Questions being asked in a tone that suggested she'd seen far worse before 9 in the morning. These transfers, she said, tapping one column with the pen cap. Consistent amounts, consistent timing. This isn't impulse spending. Someone helped her set this up. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means she's been planning this longer than you think. And whoever advised her made at least one mistake. They didn't account for the fact that you'd noticed before she was ready. She looked up. How long until your anniversary would have been the natural moment for her to announce she was leaving? I thought about it. A few months, maybe. Patricia nodded. Then you're ahead of her timeline. That matters. She folded her hands. Here's what I need you to do. Don't move money. Don't close accounts. Don't change anything she can see. But open a personal account, just yours, and make sure your direct deposit routes they're going forward. Quietly. This week, I wrote it down. And document everything. Any communication, any absence, any unusual behavior, dates and times. I nodded. I was already doing that. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Traction. Like I'd been spinning on ice and my tires had finally found pavement. That evening, I got a call I hadn't expected. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was immediately identifiable. The particular easy confidence of a man who's never had to work too hard for anything. Grant. A pause. It's Derek Strickland. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. Look, Derek continued, and I could hear him recalibrating in real time. I know this is. I know how it looks. But I think it would be better for everyone if we talked. Like adults. Before things get complicated. I kept my voice completely neutral. How did you get this number? Naomi gave it to me. She thought. She gave you my number. I repeated. Not a question. Just letting him hear how that sounded. He stumbled slightly. She thought it might help if we just clear the air. Derek. I pulled into a gas station, put the car in park, and spoke slowly. I appreciate the call. I really do. I'll keep it in mind. Then I hung up. I sat there for a moment. Then I pulled up my voice recorder app and noted the time, date, and what had just happened. I had no recording of the call. I hadn't been fast enough, but I had a log, and that was something. What I turned over in my mind on the drive home was not Derek, but Naomi. She had given him my number. She had suggested he call me, which meant one of two things. Either she genuinely believed a conversation would smooth things over, or she was testing me, seeing how much I knew, whether I'd react. Either way, it was a miscalculation. The next morning, I was in the driveway washing my truck when a car I recognized pulled slowly up the street. Wendy Palmer, Naomi's closest friend, a woman I'd sat across from at dinner tables for years, who'd been at our wedding, who called Naomi her person. She parked 2 houses down and sat there for a moment before getting out. She walked toward me with the particular energy of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and is already regretting it. Grant. Her voice was too careful. Do you have a minute? I turned off the hose and looked at her. Wendy was a decent person. I'd always thought so. And right now she looked like a decent person who had done something she couldn't entirely live with. Sure, I said. Talk. She glanced at the house. Is Naomi out? I said simply. Say what you came to say. She pulled her cardigan tighter despite the mild temperature and finally met my eyes. I've known for a while, she admitted, her voice dropping. About Derek. She told me back in August. I didn't. I told her she was making a mistake. But she didn't listen and she stopped. I should have said something to you sooner. I know that. I don't have a good excuse. I studied her face. She wasn't performing remorse. It was the real kind, the kind that had probably been keeping her up at night. How long has it been going on? I asked. Since July. She looked at the ground. The backyard party at Curtis's. That's where it started. I absorbed that without showing anything on my face. Curtis's party. The conference I'd missed. Derek asking how I was doing, where I was living. Is there anything else I should know? My tone was calm, measured. Winnie hesitated. She has an account. Somewhere. She said it was for starting over. She glanced up. I don't know the details. She didn't tell me everything. I nodded slowly. I appreciate you coming, Wendy. She looked relieved and guilty at the same time. I'm sorry, Grant. For what it's worth. It's worth something, I said, and meant it. She left. I stood in the driveway for a moment, then picked up the hose and finished washing the truck. Everything I was learning was pointing in the same direction. Naomi had a plan, a timeline, and a head start she thought she still had. What she didn't know was that her head start was gone. I was no longer the husband standing in the dark, wondering what had gone wrong. I was the man who'd already turned on the lights. Naomi had no idea. I could see it in the way she moved around the house that week. Lighter than she'd been in months, almost relaxed. She hummed while she made coffee. She stayed up later, texting with what I assumed was manufactured casualness. She even suggested we order from the Thai place we both liked, which was the most domestic thing she'd done in weeks. She thought she was in control of the timeline. She thought I was still the man standing in the dark, waiting for her to decide what happened next. It was almost impressive, that kind of confidence. On Tuesday evening, I drove to the bank and opened a personal checking account. Just my name, new routing information, new debit card. I rerouted my direct deposit that same night from my work portal, a 15-minute process that Naomi had no visibility into whatsoever. Patricia had told me not to touch the joint accounts, so I didn't. I let them sit exactly as they were, transactions unchanged, the balance drifting along as if nothing had shifted. Wednesday, I met with Patricia again and gave her Wendy's account of things. No recorded statement, just my summary. She listened, made notes, and told me the picture was clear enough to proceed when the time came. She also flagged something I hadn't fully processed yet. The external account Naomi had been transferring money into was likely in her maiden name. Check whether she renewed her passport recently. Patricia suggested. Women planning a clean exit often do. I checked that evening. She had. 8 months ago. I sat with that for a while. Thursday passed quietly. I worked late, came home to a dinner Naomi had actually cooked, pasta, which she used to make every Sunday years ago, and ate it without letting anything show on my face. She asked about my week in the tone of someone performing normality, and I answered in kind. We were two people playing house in a place that had already stopped being a home. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Derek Strickland again. Same number. This time I let it ring. Then I opened my voice recorder, hit the red button, and called him back. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting. Derek, I said, keeping my voice easy and unhurried. Sorry I missed you. No problem. He was trying to sound casual, and not quite getting there. I wanted to follow up on what we talked about. Clear the air a little more. I appreciate that, I said pleasantly. So let me ask you something directly. How long? A beat. How long what? How long have you been seeing my wife? The pause that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Grant, it's not. It's complicated. It's not what you're probably thinking. Probably not, I agreed. So tell me what it is. He started to say something about feelings and situations and not planning for things to go this way. And I let him talk. I didn't interrupt, didn't raise my voice, just let him dig the hole deeper while my recorder captured every word. By the end of it, he had confirmed 3 things without quite realizing it. That it had been going on since summer, that Naomi had told him I was basically already checked out of the marriage, and that he had been in our home on at least one occasion when I was traveling for work. That last one hit differently than the others, but I kept my voice level. Thanks for being straight with me, I said when he finished. I'll be in touch. I hung up, stopped the recorder, and saved the file to 2 separate locations. Then I sat in my car in the parking garage and breathed steadily for about 30 seconds. He had been in my house. I drove home. I changed clothes. I grilled steaks in the backyard because it was a decent evening and because doing something with my hands helped me think. Naomi came outside at some point and stood near the door, watching me with an expression that was either guilt or mild curiosity. Hard to tell the difference on a face that had stopped letting you in. Smells good, she said. It'll be ready in 10. I answered without turning around. She went back inside. I flipped the steaks and stared at the flame and thought about everything I had now. A lawyer, a recorded call, bank evidence, Winnie's testimony, a photo from Derek's Instagram, and a passport renewal date that told me exactly when Naomi had decided she was leaving. She had built her plan brick by brick over 8 months. I had built mine in 2 weeks. The following Tuesday, Naomi came to me. Not with a confession. She wasn't there yet, or maybe she never intended to get there. What she came with was something softer and more calculated. A version of the woman I had married, showing up in the kitchen on a Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee already poured, sitting across the table and looking at me with eyes that had thawed just enough to be convincing. "Can we talk?" she asked. I set down the section of the newspaper I'd been reading and gave her my full attention. "Go ahead." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked down at it first, which was a rehearsed move. I recognized it now in a way I wouldn't have 3 weeks ago. Then she looked up. "I know I've been distant," she said quietly. "I know the last few months haven't been. I haven't been easy to be around. And I don't want to lose what we have." I kept my expression neutral and let her continue. "I think we need to try. Really try. Maybe counseling. Maybe just actually talking again. Like we used to." She tilted her head slightly. "I miss you, Grant. I miss us. The performance was good. I'll give her that." Her voice had exactly the right texture of vulnerability, and the part about missing us landed with a precision that told me she knew exactly which door to knock on. A month ago, 2 months ago, those words would have worked on me. I would have reached across the table and taken her hands and told her we could figure it out. But a month ago, I didn't know about the passport, about the account and her maiden name, about Derek Strickland standing in my kitchen. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, calmly and without cruelty, "What made you decide to say this today?" Something flickered across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've had months to have this conversation. You chose today. I'm just curious what changed." Her hands tightened slightly around the mug. "Nothing changed. I've been thinking about this for a while." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "Okay." She waited for more. When it didn't come, she pressed gently. "So, can we try?" "I think we should take a few days," I said. "Let me think about what that would actually look like." It wasn't a no. It wasn't a yes. It was a door left slightly open, which was exactly what I needed it to be. She couldn't know I was stalling. She needed to believe I was processing, weighing, teetering on the edge of giving her what she wanted. She nodded, relieved, I thought, which confirmed that this conversation had a purpose beyond the words she'd used. She reached across the table and briefly touched the back of my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Sure," I replied, and turned back to the newspaper. She left the room. I listened to her footsteps going upstairs, then pulled out my phone and sent Patricia a message. She tried a reconciliation approach this morning. Soft, well-rehearsed. I gave her nothing solid. Patricia replied within the hour, "Good. Don't engage further. Let her think she made progress. We're 2 weeks from being ready." 2 weeks. I folded the newspaper, finished my coffee, and started thinking about the next move. That evening I called Curtis and told him what had happened. He listened, then said flatly, "She's buying time." "I know," I said. "She knows something is off." He paused. Or Derek said something. That was possible. Derek's Friday phone call hadn't gone the way he'd planned, and nervous people talk. If he'd mentioned our conversation to Naomi, she would have sensed the ground shifting and moved to shore up her position. "It doesn't matter," I said. She bought herself the feeling of progress. I bought myself 2 more weeks to finish what I started. Curtis was quiet for a moment. Then, with something close to satisfaction, "Man, when did you get this calculated?" When she gave me no other choice, I told him. And that was the simple truth of it. The doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen going through a stack of mail when I heard it. 2 short rings, then a pause, then one more, which was Frank Payne's particular habit and had been for as long as I'd known the man. I set the mail down, straightened my shirt, and went to the door. Frank was 68, broad-shouldered, with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent 30 years working outdoors. Lorraine stood half a step behind him, smaller, composed, wearing the expression of a woman who had spent the drive over rehearsing something she wasn't sure she still wanted to say. They were both dressed like they'd come from church, which told me this visit had been planned. Frank, Lorraine. I stepped back and held the door open. Come in. They came in. I offered coffee. Frank said yes. Lorraine said nothing, just sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap and looked around the room as if cataloging what was still there. I set 2 mugs on the table, poured my own, and sat across from them. Frank cleared his throat. We heard from Naomi. He stopped, chose his next words carefully. She said things between you two have gotten bad, that you've been distant, that she's been trying to work on the marriage, and you've been resistant. I looked at him for a moment, then at Lorraine, then back at Frank. Is that what she told you? I said. Not a question, just giving the words room to sit. She's our daughter, Grant, Lorraine said quietly. We're not here to take sides. We just want to understand what's happening. I stood up, went to my home office, and came back with a folder. I set it on the table between them, without drama, without a word of introduction. Inside, printed screenshots of the bank transfers, a copy of the passport renewal date, the Instagram photo with Naomi and Derek at the rooftop bar, and a printed summary of Derek's phone call, date, time, the substance of what he'd confirmed. Frank picked up the folder. He opened it. His jaw tightened within the first 30 seconds. Lorraine leaned over to see, and I watched the color leave her face. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Frank set the folder down. He looked at the table. Then he looked at me, and what was in his eyes wasn't the protective anger of a father defending his daughter. It was something older and heavier than that. How long have you known? He asked. Long enough, I said. Long enough to have spoken with an attorney. Long enough to have my finances in order. Long enough to know that the reconciliation she offered me last Sunday morning was about buying time, not saving a marriage. Lorraine pressed her fingers to her mouth. Grant, we had no idea. I know you didn't, I said, and I meant it. Whatever Naomi's failings were, they weren't her parents' fault. I'm not showing you this to hurt you. I'm showing you because you came to me with her version of events, and you deserve the full picture. Frank closed the folder and pushed it slightly away, like he needed the distance. She said you checked out, that you were never home, never present. I manage 14 stores across 3 states. I replied evenly. I've worked hard my entire adult life to provide a good life for this family. My hours aren't always easy, but I have never, not once, stopped showing up for this marriage. I paused. She stopped showing up sometime around last July, when she met Derek Strickland at Curtis's backyard party. The name landed. Frank's expression shifted in a way that told me he recognized it. You know him? I asked. Frank rubbed his face with one hand. He came to her birthday dinner 2 years ago, with Curtis. He shook his head slowly. I didn't like him then. Too familiar. Too interested. He looked up. I should have said something. Frank, I said, this isn't on you. Lorraine had gone very still. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. What are you going to do? I'm going to proceed with a divorce, I said. I have an attorney. I have documentation. And I'm going to make sure that what I've spent 21 years building is protected. I kept my tone steady. I have a lot of respect for both of you. That doesn't change. But I think you should hear the truth from me directly rather than piece it together later. Frank stood up slowly, like a man carrying extra weight on his shoulders. He reached across the table and shook my hand, firm, deliberate, the handshake of a man who understood what he was acknowledging. Lorraine stood too, and for a moment she looked like she might say something more, but instead she just touched my arm briefly and looked away. They let themselves out. I stood in the kitchen and listened to Frank's truck pull out of the driveway. Then I picked up my phone and texted Patricia. Her parents came by, showed them the documentation. They left without argument. She replied in minutes. Good. That removes one potential complication. Stay the course. I put the phone in my pocket and finished my coffee. One fewer wall to hide behind. Patricia called on Monday, with 2 words that settled into my chest like an anchor dropping. We're ready. I took the afternoon off work, the first time I'd done that in months for something that wasn't a store emergency, and met her downtown. She had prepared the filing documents over the weekend, and she walked me through them with the efficient calm I'd come to rely on. Everything was in order. The asset documentation, the bank transfer evidence, the recorded call with Derek, Wendy's informal testimony, the passport renewal. Clean, thorough, and organized in a way that left very little room for argument. I'll file Tuesday morning, Patricia said. She'll be served within 48 hours of that. I nodded. In the meantime, she continued, I want you to move the savings balance from the joint account to your personal account today. Not the checking. Leave that alone for now. It's the account she monitors. But the savings has a significant balance, and I want it protected before she gets served and has any motivation to drain it. I did it from my phone in the parking garage on my way out. Transferred the entire savings balance, just over $41,000, to my personal account. Clean, legal, and 2 days ahead of anything she could do about it. That evening I came home to an empty house. Naomi was out. I didn't ask or didn't check, didn't care anymore. I made myself a simple dinner, ate at the kitchen table with the news on low, and felt the particular stillness of a man who has done what needed to be done and is now waiting for the machinery to catch up. She came home around 9, set her bag on the counter, glanced at me on the couch, offered a neutral hey that I returned in kind. She went upstairs. I heard the shower run. Normal. Ordinary. The last ordinary evening either of us would have in this house. Tuesday I was at my desk at 8 o'clock when Patricia's message came through, filed. Server goes out this afternoon. I read it twice, then put my phone face down and went back to work. She was served at 4:17 in the afternoon, according to Patricia's follow-up message. I was in a review meeting for the Eastern District stores when it came through. I read it under the table and set the phone back in my pocket without changing expression. By the time I pulled into the driveway that evening, I already knew what I was walking into. Naomi was in the kitchen when I came through the door, the divorce papers on the counter in front of her, her face a hard, controlled blank that told me she had decided on an approach. Her phone was in her hand, which meant she'd already called someone, Derek, probably, or Wendy, or both. She looked at me and said tightly, You filed without saying a single word to me. I set my keys on the hook by the door. You were planning to leave without saying a single word to me. I answered. I just moved faster. Her eyes narrowed. You went through my phone. You hired people to document my private life. And what I found, I said calmly, stepping further into the kitchen, was a wife who'd been moving money out of our joint accounts for 8 months, meeting another man in restaurants 40 miles away, and telling that man that her husband had basically checked out, while accepting coffee I brought to her nightstand every morning. She stiffened. You recorded Derek. He called me. I said simply, both times. That's not. She stopped herself, recalculating. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but harder. The savings account is gone. It's in my account, I confirmed. My attorney advised it. Fully legal, fully documented. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the pieces of her plan rearranging themselves behind her eyes. The timeline she'd built over 8 months had been stripped down to nothing in 2 weeks. The man she'd been comfortable dismissing had turned out to be a different kind of problem than she'd accounted for. I want to talk about this, she said finally. Properly. Before lawyers make every decision for us. I picked up my keys from the hook, turned back toward the door, and looked at her over my shoulder. That conversation was available to you for 8 months, I said. You had it with Derek instead. I walked out, got in my car, and drove to Curtis's house.
8 months. She had 8 months to tell the truth. She didn't. And when the moment came, he didn't yell, he didn't beg. He just said what needed to be said, and walked out. That's a strong man. Not loud, not angry, just done.
He opened the door, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. I walked in, sat down, and for the first time since this all began, let myself exhale completely. She served. Curtis asked, handing me a cold beer. She served, I said. He sat across from me and raised his own bottle. About time. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Patricia had told me up front that contested cases could drag on considerably longer, but Naomi's attorney apparently took one look at the documentation and advised her not to fight the asset division. I got the house. She got her car, her personal accounts, and a settlement figure that Patricia had negotiated down from what Naomi's side initially requested. The $41,000 I'd moved from savings stayed where it was. Derek Strickland, as it turned out, was not the landing pad Naomi had been counting on. Curtis told me, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had been proven right about someone, that Derek had gone quiet on Naomi within weeks of the filing. Apparently the reality of an ongoing divorce, attorneys, and documentation that included his name and phone records was considerably less appealing than a secret affair with a married woman. He stopped returning her calls sometime in early February. I didn't feel sorry for her. I tried to examine that honestly, and found I simply didn't. Wendy Palmer had reached out twice during the process, once to check on me, once to say she told Naomi she couldn't be her sounding board through the divorce given her own role in things. I appreciated the second call more than the first. The finalization came on a Thursday. Patricia sent me a message at 10 in the morning. Done. Certified copies by end of week. I was at work when I read it. I finished the meeting I was in, went back to my desk, and worked straight through until 6 without stopping for lunch. Not because I was avoiding anything, just because the work was there and doing it felt good. On the way home, I stopped at a dealership. I had been thinking about this for a while. Years, honestly. Long before any of this started. There was a truck I'd wanted since I was in my late 30s. A fully loaded Ford F-250, dark blue, with the towing package and the upgraded interior that Naomi had called excessive every time the subject came up. Too expensive. Too much truck. What would we even do with it? I walked onto the lot at 6:15 with the afternoon light going gold and found the one I wanted within 10 minutes. Dark blue. Every option I'd ever added to the mental list. The salesman showed me the features, and I let him talk, but I already knew what I was going to do. I drove off the lot at 8 o'clock. The seats smelled like new leather. The engine was quiet and solid under me. The stereo played the kind of country music I'd stopped listening to somewhere around year 4 of the marriage, because Naomi found it irritating. I drove out past the edge of town, windows down despite the cold, and just drove for a while. Curtis called as I was looping back. I put him on speaker. Patricia texted me. He said immediately, "It's done. It's done," I confirmed. A pause. Then, with genuine warmth, "How are you doing, man? Really?" I thought about it, as the headlights cut through the dark, and the heater ran low, and the radio played something slow and familiar in the background. How was I doing? Better than I've been in years, I said. And it was the complete and unqualified truth. Summer came back around the way it always does in Millbrook, humid and unhurried, the kind of heat that settles in by 9 in the morning and doesn't move until after dark. I had the back patio repaved in June, something I've been putting off for 3 years because there was always a reason not to. New furniture too, nothing extravagant, just solid and comfortable, the kind of setup you actually want to sit on in the evenings. The oak tree in the yard had put out more than usual that year, and I spent 2 weekends clearing leaves and didn't mind it at all. The 14 stores were running well. I'd promoted 2 managers I'd been watching for a while, and the Easter District had its best quarter on record. Work was good. Work had always been good when I let it be. Curtis had come over for the 4th of July cookout I'd hosted. Small, just a handful of people. First time I'd had anyone over since the house became mine alone. He brought his neighbor and his neighbor's sister, who turned out to be a landscape architect, named Jill, with a dry sense of humor and strong opinions about charcoal versus gas grilling. We argued about it for 40 minutes, and I didn't win, which was fine. I wasn't looking for anything. But I wasn't closed off either, which was a different thing than I'd been 8 months earlier. The truck had put on 6,000 miles. I towed a boat twice for a fishing weekend with Curtis and 2 other friends up near the Delaware Water Gap, and both trips had been exactly the kind of unhurried, low-stakes good time I hadn't made room for in years. I was going again in September. I ran into Naomi once. A Saturday morning in late July, a grocery store on the north side. She was in the produce section. I saw her first. She looked tired, not devastated, just the particular kind of tired that comes from a life that hasn't settled back and shaped the way you expected. She was alone. No Derek. No particular lightness in the way she moved. She saw me as I came around the end of the aisle. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I gave her a brief nod, the kind you give someone you used to know, and pushed my cart past and kept moving. She didn't call after me. I didn't look back. I finished my shopping, loaded the truck, and drove home with the windows down. Back at the house, I put the groceries away, poured a glass of iced tea, and took it out to the new patio furniture under the oak tree. The yard was quiet. Birds moved in the branches overhead. Somewhere down the block, a lawn mower started up. 21 years ago, I had built a life around the wrong things, or around the right things in the wrong proportions. Maybe around keeping someone happy who had already decided, somewhere along the way, that my best efforts were background noise. I had been patient when patience wasn't wisdom. I had been quiet when quiet only served her plan. But I had also, when it mattered, known when to move. I drank my tea and watched the light come through the oak leaves and felt, deeply and without performance, like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. I picked up my phone and called Curtis to ask about September.
What I respect about Grant is simple. He didn't fall apart, he got quiet, he got smart, and he took his life back. And that track he bought at the end, that track is every no she ever gave him, finally becoming a yes. Sometimes you have to lose something big before you find out who you really are. Grant found out, and I think you felt that too. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.